Now, COVID has had an impact on everything, including sex work, and some sex workers have turned to online platforms like OnlyFans, which allows them to sell photos and videos with a monthly subscription. Now, I was hoping to talk to Laura Watson from the Collective of English Prostitutes, but you'll appreciate at the moment that, as was illustrated with my conversation with Claire Walker, connections to guests are a little variable, and we have for the moment lost Laura. We do have feminist writer Julie Bindel with us. So, Julie, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Now, I know you're conscious that you can only give me one side of this discussion, but we'll start it anyway and then hopefully make contact with Laura for the other side of it in a couple of minutes' time. Oh, I'm told we've got Laura, so that's brilliant. Let's start with Laura, if you don't mind, Julie. Laura, good morning. Welcome. How are you?
Hi, good morning. Yes, sorry about that.
No, don't worry about it. So I was just saying that the coronavirus has obviously had an impact on absolutely everything, including the lives of sex workers. So just tell us a little bit about what's happened.
Well, sex workers have had a really tough time during the pandemic. You know, it's been increasingly hard for sex workers to make a living, and every way that women turn, the money is being cut. And, women have been left with, had to stop working overnight if they could, and couldn't get access to anything other than universal credit was the only thing that the government left women with, of which we know, the many problems with, the 5-week wait, the 2-child limit, and the overarching benefit cap, which, leaves people after they've paid their rent with little or nothing. We had a person in our group who was left with £1 after the rent was paid. It's just completely outrageous. And that's if you can even get universal credit. So, some women in our group weren't able to access any government support and therefore had to continue working throughout the pandemic and face the terrible decision of having to put their health at risk or, frankly, starvation. And that's the situation that women are in. And considering, the situation that we're in is that there's 2 million children needing free school meals.
Right.
And even in May this year, we saw that 87% of people who had lost their job because of COVID were women. And so it's not surprising, that women are having to turn to sex work to survive.
Right. So you're talking that some women have actually had no choice but to take up sex work, perhaps for the first time. Other women who were already in that business have taken their working lives online.
Yes, definitely. We've had many calls from women who are asking to start work and for advice on how to do that because they have, no other income whatsoever. Some women had to continue working in person, unfortunately, and some women, where they were able to, went online if they could.
Okay, so as we were going to talk specifically about the online platform OnlyFans, very briefly, Laura, what is it?
It's an online platform where you basically sell your photos and your videos, and you basically try and gain supporters and followers and sort of, subscribers to your site, basically. And it's, there's difficulties to everything. It's not an ideal situation, but, for some women it was the only form of income they could get. And so it was, in that respect, the only option they could do. What we were particularly, worried about was that if women couldn't get access to any other money whatsoever, and this was the only thing that they were reliant on, then that platform would, have an advantage, and if women have less coming in, they'll be forced to take more risk to earn the same amount of money. So, for example, giving up anonymity or showing their face online.
Right.
And that has led to a big increase in stalking cases, which we've been dealing with a lot of stalking cases recently.
None of this is ideal. None of anything any of us are up against right now is ideal. Julie, from one perspective, one might assume that working online was safer for women. Yes?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that the language in this discussion so far is actually very one-sided, and it belies a position using terms like sex worker rather than women who are prostituted, using really bland expressions about the online content when in fact we're talking about pornography, really does give the impression that this is something quite sanitised version of prostitution, when in fact this is what it is. It's prostitution from behind a camera. And yes, of course, you can look at different levels of danger for women within the sex trade, which OnlyFans is part of. And clearly, if there were a choice between being prostituted with direct physical contact from the punters on the street or from behind a screen, then I'm sure that many women would argue that this is far less bad, far less dangerous. But we have to look at it in context. What we're doing, especially in the conversations during the pandemic, is making an assumption that men somehow will suffer greatly, that it's almost a human rights violation if they can't have sexual access to women, whether it's direct or indirect. And some of the content on OnlyFans that's directed by the punters who are paying is utterly grotesque and harmful to the women,
right,
despite the fact that this is seen as in fact not dangerous in any way. There are requests for women to dress as schoolgirls, to choke
Julie,
themselves,
I think many
to film themselves defecating.
Look, by the way, if anybody has been upset by that, perhaps I should have given a warning before we started this conversation that this will be an explicit and necessarily explicit conversation, I should say. So apologies for that. Julie, I think a lot of people listening will know exactly where you come from when we're talking about this subject. But can we just agree that we don't live in an ideal world, and whether many people listening like it or not, this is a reality for some women, including members of the Collective of English Prostitutes. But I would just make the assumption, and you can tell me whether I'm wrong or not, that working online does at least offer some of these women a little more protection.
Women have been stalked. Their content has been dumped on porn sites such as Pornhub. That women are psychologically damaged by knowing that there is a permanent record of their prostitution, of their sexual exploitation, that can be circulated forevermore. Yes, you can look at different levels of harm and risk, but it's always risky. Prostitution is never safe. But what we need to do is take the conversation off the women who are being exploited, who do have a human right,
yes,
and a basic right to eat and feed their children,
course,
and have shelter. But we need to focus on the men.
Right,
we need to focus on the demand.
Yes, absolutely. But I think, Laura, you would say that given the choice between putting some food on the table and not being able to do so, some, if not all of your members have had to resort to platforms like OnlyFans.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially during this pandemic. I mean, the question really is how much power do you have to, resist, refuse things that you don't want to do? And the question is the alternatives to prostitution. That's really at the root of it. And if you are starving, you don't have the power to refuse. You just don't. And the alternatives have to be there.
But Julie is right, Laura, to raise the point that men they have no right to do this to women. It's not, they don't have to have sex with anybody, whether it's online or in any other way.
We are not saying that men have a right to sex whatsoever. We are an organisation campaigning for sex workers' rights and safety and for alternatives for women, so that nobody has to, you can leave prostitution if and when you want to. That's always been our basis and continues to be our basis. The question is that we have been raising, the government needs to provide alternatives for women, and the poverty, the terrible poverty that women are facing, and where is the feminist outcry on all of this? We haven't heard a peep throughout the whole pandemic. Sex workers need the backing from feminists on issues like dealing with the universal credit and being left with no income and having to go to food banks to feed your children.
Right.
But there has been no support, and only proposals instead to increase the criminalisation of prostitution in the form of criminalising clients, which is a complete outrage. There has been no proposal to increase money for women by feminists.
Right. Laura, are you in more control financially if you work for online platforms like OnlyFans? Because they take quite a substantial cut, don't they?
Well, they take 20%, which is, women have said that that's no more than other middlemen take in other industries. So it's in a context of, the system that we live in and the working conditions of lots of industries. So it's not ideal. It'd be great if you could get 100%, obviously, and it would be great if women could set up their own websites themselves, but that's not always possible. So that's the situation that we're in. So, I mean, in terms of financial, what did you say? Sorry, financial independence. I guess that, I mean, women are having to work hard on these platforms to get to get
exactly, and that's
decent amount of money to live
and
on.
that's what worries the likes of Julie. I mean, Julie, go on. You can take up that point.
Well, first of all, I'd like to take issue with something Laura said about how feminists have not. She said that we have not been campaigning for better alternatives for women in prostitution since the pandemic. We always have. In fact, we've been lobbying the government for time immemorial for exit strategies for women, because the vast majority of women in prostitution. May I speak? You've had quite a lot of time, Laura. We've been lobbying for exit strategies for a long time and viable alternatives for women. And in fact, it was the feminists who wished to see the end of prostitution, and actually do wish to see the criminalisation of demand, that took a case to the High Court, which would effectively, if successful, lead to the decriminalisation of any person in prostitution. So we were the ones that actually took that case. It's absolutely not the case that we wish to further criminalise those who are prostituted.
Julie, I'm going to allow Laura one more word, and then I will come back to you because Laura started. So, Laura.
Well, the thing is, you campaign you do advocate for the increased criminalisation of the sex industry via the criminalisation of clients, but in the many countries where that's been implemented, sex workers have not been decriminalised, and we don't hear a lot of opposition from you about that on the way that those policies and laws have been implemented in other countries. Throughout the pandemic, women have continued to face, shockingly, criminalisation, police raids, harassment and arrests, and this is not right. And basically, if the government are serious about helping women to stop work, then they have to provide the money and resources. And not only exiting strategies, because what are women exiting into? We need the alternatives, the benefits to be at a level that people can live on. Scrapping the 2-child limit and the 5-week wait would be the first things to help women out of prostitution.
Right, thank you. And a quick one from you, Julie.
Absolutely agree with Laura. We need to provide viable alternatives. It's interesting, though, isn't it? This is actually about women. This is about male violence and male dominance. This is not about men going hungry and starving and not being able to provide for their children during the pandemic. It's actually about women. We need to look at this as a symptom of patriarchy and male violence. That's what the sex industry is.
Thank you both very much. Julie Bindel, feminist writer, and Laura Watson, who represents the Collective of English Prostitutes. And your thoughts on that are welcome. You can contact us on social media, email the programme via the website.